Eleanor was 32 years old, standing on the steps of the military academy last Tuesday afternoon. The rain beat hard against the gray stone, soaking through the thin fabric of her wool coat and chilling her shoulders. An arrogant army major, who also happened to be her brother-in-law, deliberately stepped into her path and loudly declared that she was blocking the way of important guests. He dismissed her as a nobody, entirely unaware that within 48 hours, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs would stand before a crowded banquet hall to render her a full military salute, effectively stripping the major of his pride and his career. Before revealing what happened next, please take a moment to like and subscribe, but only if this story resonates with you. Drop your city and local time in the comments. It is always wonderful knowing where you are listening from. The roots of this quiet injustice stretched far back into Eleanor's childhood. Her family operated within a rigid, unspoken hierarchy, dictated by the demands of military tradition and social appearance. Her father, a retired colonel, was the classic absent father. He was a passive enabler who consistently chose peace over fairness, retreating to his study rather than managing the conflicts in his own home. Her mother embodied the role of the cold mother. She was deeply image-conscious and status-driven, expertly performing maternal concern for an audience while remaining entirely indifferent in private. Within this polished Anglo-American household, Victoria was unequivocally the favored sibling. Victoria was loud, charismatic, and perfectly mirrored their mother's ambition. During a family Christmas dinner when Eleanor was 16, the disparity was put on stark display. The dining room smelled of roasted duck and pine resin, the table set with matching china. Victoria proudly announced her appointment to a prestigious leadership committee at school. Their mother immediately poured sparkling cider, raising a glass to her golden child. When Eleanor quietly mentioned that she had secured a highly competitive archival internship, her father merely nodded without looking up from his plate. Her mother frowned, suggesting that dusty books were hardly a suitable path for a young woman of their social standing. Yet, Eleanor was not entirely without support. Her grandfather, a retired general, served as her one true ally and the wise grandparent. He was a man of few words, but he possessed a sharp gaze that missed nothing. Later that same Christmas evening, he found Eleanor sitting alone on the cold porch railing. He handed her a small, leather-bound journal and patted her shoulder. He understood the truth of the household dynamics, and he saw Eleanor's quiet strength. He was already preparing a hidden resource for her, recognizing her worth long before anyone else did. The pattern of dismissal was not built in a single day. It accumulated over years, brick by quiet brick. During the summer she turned 18, Eleanor graduated as the valedictorian of her high school class. The June heat pressed down on the football field, the air heavy with humidity and the scent of cut grass. Victoria, who was home from college, had casually mentioned needing a new vehicle. After the ceremony, their parents surprised Victoria with the keys to a new sedan in the parking lot. Eleanor stood to the side, holding her valedictorian medal, feeling the sharp edges of the ribbon in her hands. Her father offered her a polite nod, and they drove off in 2 cars, leaving Eleanor to ride home with her grandfather. Thanksgiving of 2018 brought a new layer of humiliation. By this time, Victoria had married Richard, a newly minted army major who thrived on displaying his rank. The dining room buzzed with the sound of clinking silverware and overlapping conversations. Eleanor had just published her first historical research paper, a quiet but significant professional achievement. When she attempted to share the news, Richard interrupted her. He laughed, adjusting the cuffs of his perfectly pressed uniform, and asked if she planned to spend her whole life hiding in library basements. The table erupted in polite, patronizing laughter. Eleanor looked looked down at her plate, the heat rising in her cheeks. But she said nothing. She simply folded her napkin and absorbed the slight. The exclusion reached its breaking point during a bleak February 3 years later. Their grandfather had been admitted to hospice care. The hospital hallway smelled sharply of antiseptic and floor wax. Eleanor arrived with a folder of his favorite letters, hoping to read to him. Victoria and Richard stood outside his door, blocking the entrance. Richard, wearing his uniform even on a Sunday, coldly informed her that only immediate family and decision-makers were needed inside. Eleanor's hands trembled against the manila folder. She was pushed to the hall, forced to sit on a hard plastic chair, while Victoria performed the role of the grieving granddaughter for the nurses. The emotional weight of their cruelty settled heavily into Eleanor's chest, but she maintained her composure. The defining fracture occurred on Sunday, November 14th, at 7:32 p.m. The military base was hosting a memorial gala to honor the legacy of her late grandfather. The evening air was bitter and damp, carrying the faint smell of wood smoke. Eleanor arrived wearing a simple, dignified black dress. She carried a formal invitation in her purse, issued directly by the base commander. The grand foyer of the officers' club was packed with junior officers, local dignitaries, and family friends. The soft buzz of classical music mingled with the clinking of champagne flutes. As Eleanor approached the double doors leading into the VIP reception area, Richard stepped directly into her path. His jaw was set, his chest puffed out in a display of unearned authority. Victoria stood just behind him, sipping from a crystal glass, a faint smirk playing on her lips. Richard looked Eleanor up and down, his voice carrying clearly over the ambient noise. He told her she was blocking the way of the important guests and instructed her to wait in the general overflow area. Several junior officers and family friends turned their heads, witnessing the exchange. Eleanor had done nothing to provoke this. She was merely existing, attempting to honor her grandfather's memory. The response from Richard was entirely disproportionate and clearly final. He was publicly expelling her from her own family's legacy. He expected her to cry, to argue, or to cause a scene that would validate their narrative of her being unstable. Instead, Eleanor looked at him with profound stillness. The silence stretched between them, counted in seconds. Okay, Richard, she said softly. She did not raise her voice. She did not argue. She simply turned and walked out through the heavy oak doors, stepping back into the cold November rain. If you have ever been pushed out of your own family by someone whose ego demanded your silence, you know exactly how the cold air felt against her face that night. Drop a heart in the comments if you have ever had to walk away to keep your dignity. Eleanor did not react. She prepared. The morning after the gala, she sat at her small kitchen table. The early light filtered through the blinds, casting long shadows across the worn wood. She opened the small, leather-bound journal her grandfather had given her years ago. Tucked inside the back cover was a sealed envelope and the business card of a senior military attorney in Washington. Her grandfather had known exactly who Richard and Victoria were. He had anticipated this exclusion, and he had established an irrevocable trust in Eleanor's name. The trust did not merely contain financial assets totaling $2,500,000 USD. It contained the physical, classified commendations of his career, along with explicit legal instructions regarding who was authorized to manage his military legacy. Eleanor spent the next 3 months demonstrating absolute competence. She consulted attorneys, financial advisors, and military archivists. She gathered every piece of documentation required to execute his final orders. She made lists. She rehearsed her steps. She moved with methodical precision, keeping her actions entirely hidden from her family. There was only one moment of doubt. At 2 a.m., on a Tuesday, She found herself sitting on the floor of her kitchen, the cold tiles pressing against her skin. The sheer weight of walking away from her blood relatives pressed down on her. She held her phone, looking at Victoria's contact name, briefly wondering if a conversation could fix things. A tear slipped down her cheek, but she remembered the hospital hallway. She remembered the smirk on Victoria's face at the gala. The vulnerability passed, replaced by a quiet, unshakable resolve. She was acting from a place of pain, not malice, and her preparation continued. What do you think happened next? Did Eleanor make the right call by keeping her plans a secret? Let me know your thoughts in the comments before we move on to the evening everything changed. The reckoning arrived 6 months later at the base's annual formal banquet. The setting was undeniably high stakes. Over 350 witnesses filled the grand ballroom, including generals, local politicians, and the commanding officers whose opinions Richard valued above all else. The room was decorated with crisp white tablecloths and heavy silver centerpieces. Richard was expecting a public promotion to lieutenant colonel that evening, a fact Victoria had been loudly broadcasting for weeks. Eleanor sat at a table near the back, entirely unnoticed. Her hands rested calmly in her lap. The trigger occurred when Richard stood up at the head table to deliver a toast. He tapped his glass, the sharp ring cutting through the chatter. He spoke grandly about his connection to Eleanor's grandfather, falsely claiming that the late general had privately entrusted him with leading the family's military legacy. He smiled out at the crowd, bathing in their polite attention. Eleanor stood up. The scraping of her chair was quiet, but her movement caught the eye of the base commander. She walked toward the front of the room, her footsteps steady. She did not shout. She did not mock. She approached the microphone with a level, factual demeanor. She produced a thick, embossed folder and handed it directly to the base commander. Major, Eleanor said softly, her voice echoing gently through the silent room. My grandfather entrusted his legacy to one person. The documentation is certified. Before Richard could formulate a dismissive reply, the heavy doors at the back of the ballroom opened. The room fell into a stunned silence. The chairman of the Joint Chiefs, a man who had once been her grandfather's closest prot, walked down the center aisle. He had flown in specifically at the request of Eleanor's attorneys to execute the final clause of the general's will. The chairman stepped up to the podium, ignoring Richard entirely. He turned to Eleanor, drew himself to his full height, and rendered a crisp, full military salute. For your service to his memory, and by his final orders, the chairman announced, his voice booming. The verdict from the room was immediate and visible. A profound shift in body language rippled through the officers. Several high-ranking guests stood up and began to applaud. Richard's face went entirely white. He dropped his dinner napkin on the floor. Victoria stared in open-mouthed horror as the applause swelled into a standing ovation directed entirely at Eleanor. The consequences for Richard and Victoria unfolded with devastating natural momentum over the following weeks. Eleanor remained entirely passive, returning to her quiet life and never once contacting them. The truth had been exposed, and the fallout was inescapable. Richard's expected promotion to lieutenant colonel was quietly, permanently withdrawn. The commanding officers who had witnessed his public humiliation distanced themselves immediately. Within a month, he was transferred to a desk assignment in a remote logistics unit, stripped of the prestige he so desperately craved. Victoria's social standing collapsed completely. She was politely but firmly removed from the officers' wives' committee. The friends who used to attend her lavish dinners suddenly stopped returning her calls. Financially, the couple faced ruin. Relying on the assumption of Richard's promotion and a large inheritance, they had over-leveraged themselves. Without the general's money, which was safely secured in Eleanor's trust, they faced foreclosed properties and mounting debt. Even the absent father and the cold mother found themselves ostracized by their country club peers, their carefully curated image shattered by the public revelation of their cruelty. The dominoes fell rapidly, driven entirely by the antagonist's own historical choices. A year later, Eleanor sat at a large, sturdy wooden table. The setting was her new home, a small but beautiful house situated near the coast. The kitchen smelled warmly of fresh bread and roasting herbs. Rain patterned softly against the window glass, but inside, the light was golden and warm. The table was surrounded by mismatched chairs, a stark contrast to the rigid, matching china of her childhood. She was sharing a Sunday dinner with her chosen family. The chairman and his wife, who had become a chosen mentor to Eleanor, sat across from her, laughing over a shared story. A close friend from the archives poured wine. There were no uniforms, no performances, and no demands for perfection. Her birth family was entirely absent from the frame. They belonged to a past she had gracefully laid to rest. Eleanor raised her glass. The crystal caught the warm light of the dining room. She did not speak of vengeance or anger. She simply smiled, looking at the people who had actively chosen to be there, and took a quiet sip. She was finally at peace. If you are watching this and you recognize yourself in this story, please know that you are not alone. Often, the people who demand your silence are simply terrified of your strength. You are allowed to set boundaries. You are allowed to walk away from tables where respect is no longer being served. Family is not blood. Family is who shows up. Setting boundaries is not revenge. It is survival. The truth does not expire, and you do not owe anyone your life or your dignity. Apologies expire, but boundaries do not. Thank you for spending this time with me. If these words brought you comfort or clarity, please consider sharing this video with someone who might need to hear it. Subscribe when you feel ready, and take care of yourself until next time.